Hey, and welcome to episode 1 of Replayed, my ongoing series where I play through classic video games and give my live, unfiltered thoughts on that experience. Sometimes it'll be good, sometimes it'll be rough, but you get to see all of that unfiltered and unedited. This episode will be covering the original PlayStation 1 version of Tomb Raider 1, and let me just say right off the bat, this game is an absolute classic. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Tomb Raider 1 is a stone cold legend in the video game space, and it set in motion one of the biggest video game franchises to emerge from the 1990s. Tomb Raider is an action adventure game developed by Core Design and was published by Eidos Interactive. As you can see from this intro cutscene, it's very much relying on very early CGI to set the tone of this world. But one thing I really love about this opening cutscene is that it gives us plenty of Lara's personality. Lara is such a badass in this scene, and you get a vibe for who she is as a character right off the bat. I do appreciate the word art font on the front of that magazine there, and I also love that we're using technology that in 1996 probably would have been considered witchcraft, because let me tell you, getting a connection like that in a public space would not have been that easy. So Natla here is giving Lara the brief on a potential mission that will take her to Peru. Lara isn't particularly interested in the riches that Natla is offering here. Lara is in it for the sport and the adventure of it all. And it's only really when Natla puts these images of the mountains in the Peruvian range up that she actually starts to pay attention. This is the Skion, this is the MacGuffin of this game, and we have to do our best to get these pieces. As the game unfolds, we'll be collecting different parts of it to assemble it eventually, but for now we're going to dive into the main menu. And this music in the main menu, for me, it is ingrained in my brain. Nathan McCree really outdid themselves with the Tomb Raider theme here, and it can't be understated just how beautiful this is. I love a lot of the music in this game, and I feel that the use of ambient soundtracks and generally just not overscoring the game, it works to the benefit of this title, and I'll talk about that as we make our way through the experience. But very quickly, I want to dive into Lara's Manor. On the channel, I've already put a video up where I've done a big deep dive into the free versions of Lara's Manor from these original Tomb Raider games, so I'm not going to do everything here, but I did just want to say in this video, because I think it's important that I keep everything self-contained to this, I love Croft Manor. Croft Manor for me is such an impressive feat for the time in which it was created. I love the fact, for example, that it fakes outdoor areas. Tomb Raider 1 doesn't really allow for use of outdoor areas. There have to be various workarounds and tricks used to make that happen. So I love when you look out the windows in Croft Manor, you see this sort of fake 3D foliage outside. It makes it feel like this is a lot bigger than it actually is, and I think that it's pretty cool. Obviously, by the time we get to Tomb Raider 2, outdoor areas don't really matter that much because there's a lot of outdoor areas. But I just love the fact that we get to see behind the curtain and we get to learn a lot about Lara Croft. I feel like this adds a lot of weight to the Tomb Raider experience, but I also think that the implementation of Croft Manor in this way is one of the reasons why so many people were critical of Tomb Raider for a stretch of the 2000s, and I would say for a lot of the 2010s. You see, one of the big problems with Tomb Raider is that its control scheme really requires the player to learn and to understand the experience. And a lot of people never stop by Lara's mansion because in modern video games, tutorials are given out in the opening level, whereas in this game, you're kind of just dropped into the caves and you're expected to know what to do. The intention is that you're supposed to go to Croft Manor and learn your craft. But as I said, in modern video games, I suspect a lot of people just barge right through to the main game and don't really understand that you're learning on the job in Tomb Raider. The game does not hold your hand, and I appreciate that. So we're back into the CGI cutscenes here. We get one of these every few levels to push the story along. I love how Lara here isn't really dressed for the occasion. She's kind of wearing some things that are appropriate, but those shorts are definitely not weather appropriate, let's put it that way. She's more interested in aura farming as we enter the cave here. And I kind of feel bad for the guide here because the guide's about to become lunch for a bunch of wolves that are going to pounce out of the temple. And Lara's going to press this button. It's interesting in the Tomb Raider Anniversary remake, they actually let you play this whole section through as actual gameplay. Whereas in this one, because they don't really want to deal with the outdoor area, they just kind of have it play out in a cutscene. But I do like that there is an imminent threat of danger. And once we get inside the cave, I will discuss a decision I think is actually really, really cool that the developers put into the opening level. Lara here defying gravity like a superhero. She drops down here and just starts wailing on this poor pack of wolves who've probably been waiting in that cave for a good long while for a snack to turn up. Unfortunately, we did not save the guide, which is bad for the life expectancy, but good for us because we don't have to deal with an AI character walking behind us. I do love the use of cinematography here. They make Lara look so small against this large building, and I just love the little looks that Lara gives. Again, it all just adds flavor to the Lara Croft character. It would have been so easy to just have Lara look gorgeous and that be it, but just the way she looks at the world, the way she acts in the environments, the way she speaks to the player, the way that she interacts with things, it just adds personality. And the thing with Tomb Raider, in my opinion, is that it doesn't just feel like an adventure game. It feels like you are on an adventure with Lara. She's bringing you on this journey with her, and you have to look after her. And I really, really like that. I love the look and stylings of these caves. I feel like these spaces are so big, they're so beautiful to look at. And yes, they are a bit blocky, a bit sort of glitchy here on the PlayStation 1, but that's just the nature of the PlayStation 1 beast. I love the fact that there's a secret here at the start. If you're paying particular attention, you can grab yourself an extra stim pack, which, we're not going to say no to, are we? The thing, like I said earlier on as well, is that there are no tutorials in this game. The game is never going to flash anything up on screen and say, press this button to do this. In the remakes, the anniversary remakes I'm speaking about here, you actually get a bunch of on-screen prompts that tell you what to do. I get the feeling that when they were making that, they kind of ran into that problem I discussed earlier on, where the Croft Manor section wasn't being used for the purpose intended. And so they just decided to put a tutorial at the front of that anyway. I feel like the Legends trilogy focused more on Croft Manor as an experience rather than a true sort of testing ground for the player to train in. You can see here as well, there's a large variety in spaces. There's some very wide open areas, and there's also some spaces that feel more claustrophobic, like this area here. The thing with Lara as well is that she will largely point at enemies, and she'll do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of aiming. The game doesn't ask you to auto aim, which I think is a bit of a blessing, because I feel like that would have been a very tedious time at this point in particular. But what I appreciate is the fact that when we came in the caves at the start, there were footprints from the pack of wolves that we saw. And if you follow the footprints, well, the paw prints all the way back here, you'll see that this is actually where they originated from. It's a very cool little touch, and it sort of adds a bit of lore to this space because it makes it seem like the wolves heard you out front and decided to come and see what they could get for lunch. What I also like as well is that there's a lot of potential for exploration in these spaces. These areas are not just big and interesting to look at, there's also lots of nooks and crannies that you can explore. I think there's a secret down there that I'm not really going to bother going for. I think secrets are interesting sometimes in Tomb Raider 1, but ultimately, I don't really get the feeling that I need to go out of my way to actually get all that because, frankly, there's enough to explore within the game anyway. You're now going to also see a pretty interesting diversion from the PC version of Tomb Raider. The Sega, Saturn, and PlayStation 1 versions of Doom make use of these blue crystals. Now, the idea here is that you can save to a memory card at any point when you come up to these crystals. Unfortunately, that means that you don't actually get the right to save whenever you want in Tomb Raider 1 on PlayStation 1. In the PC version, you can. In the PC version, you can pause and go into the menu and save as you feel like. But in the console versions here, you actually are forced to do it at fixed points. And this can create a problem in some of the later levels when you are having to backtrack across these same spaces multiple times. In linear levels like this, it isn't such a problem because you're moving on and you're never really going to go back to that space. But in some levels, you are required to pass multiple times through particular spaces, and you end up using a crystal much earlier than you probably want to, and it means that then you're basically locked out of using that spot again. I don't particularly love the save game crystal method. I do feel that it's a bit silly and it's a bit over cumbersome for Tomb Raider 1. And what's particularly curious is in Tomb Raider 2, it just lets you save the game wherever you want anyway. And then in Tomb Raider 3, they kind of went back to a halfway house where you can pick up crystals around the game and take them with you, but they're like a disposable item that runs out. So yeah, I get the feeling that they really didn't know what they were wanted to do with the save game system, but I definitely feel that Tomb Raider 1's is the least intuitive of all three options. You can see here that we are interacting with the world, we are exploring pretty well, and I feel that this opening level does a particularly good job of honing those skills that you were supposed to have learned at Croft Manor. I feel like the real world implementation here of the hazards is pretty fun. You never feel truly overwhelmed in this level. You're always kind of safe, I feel. The only time that you can really be in any danger is if you're jumping off something and breaking your neck, which you can do in this level if you're not too careful, and also the fact that the wolves numbers are never too overwhelming. At most you're going to have like 3 in front of you, which you saw earlier on, and I don't think that that's too much for a player to handle. I will say though, I am not the biggest fan of combat in these earlier Tomb Raider games. As much as I love these titles, as intuitive as I find the gameplay and as fun as it is to explore, I do find the combat in this first game is somewhat arduous. It feels like when you're engaging with an enemy, you just kind of have to stand there and shoot them until enemy goes dead, and you basically just have to run through your medkit stash until the enemy is no longer moving. It's not as easy in this version of Tomb Raider to move around, and it's one of the things I think the sequels do actually improve on quite considerably. One thing I particularly like about Tomb Raider 1 that I think it does better than its sequels, I feel like Tomb Raider 1 really does a great job of hammering home the fact that it is Lara versus these monolithic structures that she's exploring. In Tomb Raider 2 and Tomb Raider 3, there's quite a lot of other people that you'll see poking around levels. The games really like to put other human enemies at the forefront, whereas in Tomb Raider 1, you are basically fighting against wildlife in these cave systems and these temples. There's a handful of times you'll face off against people, but it's never like that prevalent in Tomb Raider 1. And I actually appreciate that. One thing that this game really nails for me is just the atmosphere. When you're running around, every corner feels like it holds something interesting to look at. For example, these feel like stables. Where did that bird come from, for example? I like the fact that the bird just sort of charges out at you like it's really just annoyed that Lara has come to ruin its day. It's also a good showcase for the limitations of that combat system, as I was saying earlier on. Lara has no melee moves in this game, so you're pretty much forced to make use of her weapons if any kind of danger does find its way towards you. And I will say that as the game goes on, you do end up with some underwater encounters that, in my opinion, feel very out of place in Tomb Raider 1, because you kind of have to stand above the water and shoot down to where the enemies are. Usually it's crocodiles or alligators or eels or things of that nature. And I have to say, I don't think that that was a particularly good idea. I get why they wanted to put some hazards in the water, because up to about the midway point in the game, water is pretty safe. So they probably felt that it was too safe for players. Oh, just bashed myself against the wall there. But I do feel that in Tomb Raider 1, the water combat is definitely something that needs, further refinement. If they weren't going to give you a weapon that you could fire underwater, I probably wouldn't have just bothered putting enemies underwater, to be honest. I would have put more other hazards down here and implemented hazards that way, rather than forcing players to basically swim away from animals that are trying to chomp Lara's legs off. I love the underwater ambience, by the way, here. I love the fact that when you're swimming, it just feels so intuitive. It feels really easy to understand what you're meant to do. It's really fun to swim in Tomb Raider 1, and I know that's probably going to be a hot take to some people, but I always feel like you are in total control of Lara underwater. You have the ability to swim, and you have the ability to swim in any direction that you really want to, and you can stop, you can look around, and I think that it's one of the better underwater systems from games in the 1990s. Nothing is worse than playing a game where there's a poorly implemented underwater system, but I genuinely just love swimming around with Lara in Tomb Raider 1. It just feels really fun, and I love the graphics down here. I love the flickering lights. They've done an excellent job with the art direction under the water here, just making it feel like you are in a different kind of space to what you are used to seeing above. And it's crazy what just some texture work and a slight change in lighting can really achieve. I also have to say that I really love the level design in Tomb Raider 1. I feel like a lot of the spaces that were created for this game were created to intrigue and interest players in ways that made them want to explore these spaces. For example, the area we're in here, it's pretty open, planned. You can go in any direction you want. There's plenty of ways that you can explore, and there's a lot of redundant spaces, but spaces that really add flavor to what this area is meant to be. And I really like the fact that the game doesn't force you to go in one particular direction. It's something that I think the remake of Tomb Raider Anniversary kind of slips up on at points, because it really wants you to experience something a bit more linear. Whereas I feel like there's quite a lot of levels in Tomb Raider 1 here where you are just left to your own devices and you have to do tomb raiding. You actually have to partake in the experience of exploring these tombs, trying to suss out what's going on, and completing the puzzles at your own leisure. And that is both a blessing and a curse. There are times in Tomb Raider 1 where you can genuinely feel lost, where you can feel very much like you're being spun around by the game. I guess that's one of the problems with games like this at this time, because in modern games you are given a lot of signposts and told what to do, whereas in this game the developers just expect you to learn, adapt, and make use of the environment to do what you need. For example, we are pushing into this space here. There are actually two keys in this room. Now, most players will probably not even spot initially that there are two keys, because one is here, it's tucked in this little alcove. Now, in most video games, when you pick up one key, you're like, yes, okay, that's it. I need to go to the next space. And you could run down there, but you actually need to walk over here and grab the second key. If you don't grab this second key, when you hit the end of the level, you actually can get stuck. And imagine not knowing where that key is and having to explore every nook and cranny of this level to find that little statue that was literally right next to where the first key was. It's quite devious, it's quite mean, but I kind of love it because it just kind of shows that the developers were willing to be that level of mean to give players a experience, and also to teach them very early on that they have to explore every space. You can't just run into a room, grab what you think you need, and then run out, because you might miss something interesting. Tomb Raider 1 really encourages that kind of behavior, whereas with future Tomb Raider games, in particular Tomb Raider 2, I feel like some of the levels are just too long. They go on, and the problem is that they're not nearly as interesting to explore, because while there are some open spaces that are really fun in those games, I feel that the game leans more into trying to fit into real world aesthetics, like in Venice, for example. And I feel like it's just not as fun to explore as some of the spaces that Tomb Raider 1 creates. For example, the awe of just walking into this cavernous area here, it's really, really amazing. And on PlayStation 1 and back in the day, this would have been really, really amazing. And also the fact that there's a bunch of wolves here who just will not leave Lara alone. But I do like the level design in Tomb Raider 1. I think it's very tight and I think it's very well considered across the board. As Tomb Raider 1 goes on, I think that the level design also leans a lot heavier into puzzle based situations. The game really wants you to explore and really wants you to solve puzzles using the environment, which I really, really like. Yay, I just ran off the edge there. One of the things with Tomb Raider as well, and it's a good time to mention it because you can see from the mistake I made there, you do get punished very severely for trying to rush. If you try to rush through this game, if you don't give it the respect that it demands, you will just fall into a pit of spikes, or you'll fall off a cliff, or you'll fall into the water. It's just one of those things that Tomb Raider loves to do as a reminder to players to respect what's going on. But I also just love the vibes of Tomb Raider 1. As the series has moved on, I feel like it's kind of lost touch with this kind of experience. The desire to add more cinematics and to make Tomb Raider more of an action adventure with the action up front and the adventure very much a secondary. I feel like just the enjoyment of being in these large empty spaces with just a handful of wildlife creatures to help, get past the time with Lara. I just feel like the series has kind of lost that a little bit. And it's one of the reasons why I feel like these original Tomb Raider games, they just feel so special because you wouldn't get a game like this in the modern era. In the modern era, you'd probably have a lot more actiony things going on. You'd probably have a lot more things added in to try and spice up the content. Whereas here, I feel like Lara is just the star of the show, and I think that the connection between Lara and the player in this game is at its strongest because I feel like there's not really that much to distract from the overall experience. I feel like this is the purest Tomb Raider experience, and unfortunately, like I said, I feel like the series never really comes back to this kind of level of immersion in terms of Lara and just being alone in these large spaces. It always feels like in future games, things are being added to sort of add a bit more action and tension to proceedings. It also should be said that a lot of the puzzles in Tomb Raider are not really that difficult. It's really just a case of finding your way to the next point and making sure that you don't die along the way. See there, for example, I could have just run off and Lara would have broken her neck dropping down to that red floor. I think it's also worth mentioning that Tomb Raider actually began its existence on the Sega Saturn. Believe it or not, Tomb Raider 1 arrived on Sega Saturn about a month before the PlayStation 1 version. Yet many people would go on to characterize Lara Croft as a mascot for Sony PlayStation. The Sega Saturn version has a lot of performance issues that make it a lot less exciting and interesting to play, in my opinion, in the modern times. It's effectively the PlayStation 1 version, but with slightly lower resolution and slightly more awkward performance issues going on. It's interesting as well. I did read that there was a Tomb Raider 2 in development at some point for the Sega Saturn. I think someone's actually managed to port that in the recent months on YouTube. I was watching a video a few months back about it. Very impressive stuff, and it's very clear that Tomb Raider was originally being envisioned as a multi-platform character. I even saw someone say that there was thoughts about a Nintendo 64 version of Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider 64 would have been absolutely wild because I feel like the Nintendo 64 might have done a better job than the PlayStation of rendering these 3D worlds. Who knows? Who knows? It would have been fun to see it though. I think most famously as well, Tomb Raider 1 turned up on the N-Gage when that was a thing in 2003. It was actually one of the poster games that they really heavily featured in promotion for that console. I've never actually played that version, but I am aware that they reskin Lara and give her a look that's more in line with Angel of Darkness, which I think is kind of hilarious in terms of the timeline and what it does to Lara as a character, because Lara Croft in Angel of Darkness, well, that's an experience all to itself. But getting back to talking about Tomb Raider 1 here, I do love that a lot of the secrets in this game, you really have to kind of be paying attention because, as you can see, this space here, it's never signposted to the game, it's never signposted or anything like that. You just have to kind of be paying attention to notice that there's a little gap at the back of that wall there. The interesting thing as well is that in Tomb Raider games, there isn't really much of a difficulty setting to choose from when you're picking your experience. Everyone basically gets the same level of experience when you boot up Tomb Raider on PlayStation 1, which I think is interesting because it really does mean that you have to get good because there are points in this game where the difficulty can spike pretty aggressively and the level design completely encourages that. And we're going to see that in this next level. I think one of the things Tomb Raider does really well as a game as well is that it draws from its inspiration, but it doesn't do too much in the way of copying them outright. It's very clear that Indiana Jones and Prince of Persia are the two big inspirations, I would say, for Tomb Raider as an experience. The Prince of Persia series was a pretty brutal platforming experience, while Indiana Jones, well, I mean, the comparisons are pretty much there. One thing I really love about this level, by the way, is that when you sort of jump along these platforms, if you fall into the water here, you're basically forced to go all the way down to this waterfall here. And I really, really like the fact that when you try to get out of the water, you're immediately attacked by these wolves. It feels very dangerous because it feels like you're very vulnerable. And once again, I feel like if they'd let you sort of use the pistols while you're on the water surface, it might have made things a touch easier in dealing with enemies like that. I feel like a lot of these situations were designed around the limitations of Lara, and that's why I feel like Lara is fairly limited in terms of what she can do, because I feel like the developers really wanted to create some of these situations outright for the player, and I think that they were very intentional. That's not a bad thing, I just think it's worth me giving my 2 cents on that. It wouldn't have been that difficult to have Lara be able to shoot from the water. It's also worth mentioning as well that Lara, by design, is intentionally very fragile. The idea is that you're supposed to be looking after Lara and trying to get her through all these different situations that the developers want to put her in. The intention, I think, there is pretty admirable, and I've seen it said in interviews that Lara is meant to be this very sort of easily killable character, and that if players are not paying careful attention to what they're doing, they could easily kill her, or they can put her in a situation where she can be harmed greatly. As we begin to head outside here, I do like the fact that in Tomb Raider 1, they can't really do outdoor spaces. The engine just wasn't designed in a way that allowed them to achieve this at this point. So this area here ends up feeling very mysterious, and it has this weird sort of dark atmosphere to it because of the use of the dark skies and just the general darkness in the distance. The draw distance really does add to the atmosphere of this space. It feels so big, so interesting, and you can see that the performance is going down ever so slightly. Now, of course, the T-Rex fight is one of the more iconic encounters from across the Tomb Raider series, and I think it's fair to say that many players probably wandered into this space not expecting to face off against a giant T-Rex. And you can see that even just by running into us, it's doing plenty of damage to Lara. Yeah, I'm actually going to have to use a medkit here. There we go. It's not too difficult to defeat the T-Rex, but I think for a lot of players, when you step into this big open space, they probably weren't expecting to face off against something that big. There's nothing before the T-Rex in the game that even comes close to matching it in terms of scale, and I think the fact that it comes stomping around the corner towards you will freak a lot of players out. The addition of dinosaurs, in my opinion, is just super fun, because it kind of signposts very early on that this is not a super serious adventure that's going to be sticking to the laws of reality. It is going to be having some fun, because let me tell you, if Lara proved that dinosaurs still existed, she wouldn't just be a billionaire with one mana, she'd probably have like a whole collection of manas with the money she could make off that. One of the bigger critiques I see about Tomb Raider 1 whenever I see people talking about it online and in YouTube videos is the fact that you're not really told what your objective actually is in a lot of these levels. most of the time you are expected to stumble upon what you need to fix, or a door that needs opening, or cogs that need finding, and you basically have to work it out for yourself. And again, I suspect that's one of the reasons why so many modern gamers who've come back to experience Tomb Raider 1 have a bit of a difficult time of it. This game does next to nothing outside of giving you a compass that points in the general direction you're supposed to be aiming in actually telling you what to do. You actually have to put in the hard graft of exploring these spaces, of finding the ledges that you need to jump up, and you also need to be smart enough to work out the sequence of events that you need to produce in order to finish off the experience. I also love, for example, that you get some set piece moments like this. There's no reason for that bridge jump to be here. They could have found many other ways to make you get over here to grab the cog, but it's there because it looks pretty, and it looks pretty awesome. And by the looks of the trailer for the new Tomb Raider game, there's going to be a version of this in that game as well. So, it's clear that even in the modern times, this bridge jump is going to still be a thing. But I think that because these spaces are so expansive, and because there's just so many different directions that the player can head off into, some players don't like that. And I think that some of the critiques about the original Tomb Raider really boil down to lack of signposting than actual core design. I feel like if there was an option to turn on maybe like a hint, or maybe to have Lara look in the direction where you're meant to go, I think a lot of people would probably have nicer things to say when coming back to experience this for the first time, because even as a seasoned veteran of the Tomb Raider franchise, the game is very hands off. It really does not want to guide you or push you in any particular way outside of giving you some slight environmental nudges here and there. It's also a bit easy sometimes to not spot where these actual caves are. For example, if you don't really pay attention, you wouldn't know that there's a shotgun shell stash around this corner. And because when you're running around the area here, you might not even spot the fact that there are some caves like hidden among the rock faces, it can be a bit difficult to work out what you're actually meant to do next. Do I think that's a big problem? Not really, because these games were designed with that in mind. Do I think it can be frustrating for new players? Also, yes, I understand both sides of that discussion, and I know for a fact that people who I'm friends with have tried Tomb Raider 1 and just found it way too difficult to get into because the game doesn't really help the player out in all that many ways. I know in the remastered trilogy they try to address this in very subtle ways, and I think that that was probably the best way to go for the remastered trilogy. The thing as well with Tomb Raider, you're expected to take a lot of leaps of faith. For example, you kind of sometimes don't know what you're going to be getting into until you drop down and you sort of land your feet somewhere. Sometimes enemies don't appear until you've actually made contact with the ground. And sometimes, like this, you have to sort of jump down and just hope that you're not going to fall into a big pit, or an enemy's not going to attack you as you're making your way back down the level. I do appreciate the fact that the spaces in this level are used multiple times. Like I said earlier on, something I think that Tomb Raider 2 and 3 kind of lose track of at times is just making better use of spaces, allowing players to sort of return and cross spaces that they've already been exploring in ways that are interesting and fun to do. Tomb Raider 1 does this really well, in my opinion, and I think that because the levels are not super long, finding the cogs in this one, it isn't that difficult if the player's willing to put the time in. But then again, I've been playing this for so many years now, maybe it's just second instinct to me to know where to go. I can imagine a lot of players on their first playthroughs may go looking in other spaces thinking there may be a cog here, or maybe there's a switch that needs opening. This isn't a critique of the game. Like I said, I actually approve of this design because I think it encourages people to actually explore these spaces. But at the same time, I can understand why modern gamers may feel that it's a bit too obtuse for them, and why a lot of people probably don't come back to experience these original Tomb Raiders in the way that I think we experienced it back in the 1990s. It's easy to forget, but back in 1996, Tomb Raider was pretty bleeding edge in terms of 3D gaming. A lot of 3D games that were arriving early in the PlayStation's life cycle were not super impressive, I would say. If you go back and look at the likes of Bubsby 3D, early platformers that were trying to contend for the early crown of best 3D game on PlayStation, I think that you'll find a lot of them just weren't that great. And I think a big part of that is because early 3D was just very hard to develop for. It was a brand new medium within the gaming space. The developers were really getting their hands on. And I think that by the time Tomb Raider was coming together, they were finally able to fully realize what I think a 3D platformer should look like. And yes, I do think that Tomb Raider, wow, I'm really sucking at jumping onto that ledge there, aren't I? I think that Tomb Raider is an incredible feat of ingenuity, especially for the time when it was released. Remember as well, there were other games like Crash Bandicoot, which I think were more interesting for the majority of people who were picking up PlayStations because Crash Bandicoot had a mascot and also it was just a more fun and bouncy game. Whereas Tomb Raider's very much down to earth. It's very serious. I mean, it's down to earth until the dinosaurs and the Atlanteans turn up later in the game, and then things get a bit funny and silly. But this is actually a good showcase for what Tomb Raider does really well, in my opinion. The game here is punishing me because I'm trying to rush. I'm not using the space correctly. I'm trying to be cheap and I'm trying to cut corners, and it's punishing me because it's not letting me actually sort of make the jump. And really, that's kind of the underriding thing with Tomb Raider 1. It punishes you for messing around and for not really respecting what the game is. The game has mechanics and it wants you to learn them, it wants you to master them, and you have to actually put the work in to make that happen. The game doesn't hand you like easy ways to skip shortcuts. There are ways to do it, obviously, and if you're good enough, you'll find them pretty easily. But when you're having to do precision jumps and such, you have to learn which techniques work the best. And unfortunately, in Tomb Raider, you are going to die quite a lot. It does happen. It is part of the experience with Tomb Raider. Also, have to say, I think putting this save crystal at the top of the bridge there, that's nasty work. Encouraging people to fall down. There is a secret over there, but I don't know if it's actually worth going for right now. We'll see. I'll see how I feel in a second. But basically, if you wandered upstream at the start of the level, you would have spotted this, and this would have been the only hint for what you were actually looking for in the level. Again, Tomb Raider expects you to look, observe, and take in the surroundings and figure out the best way forward. It's not going to hold your hand, no matter how much you might want it to. And when we hit this switch here, the river should drain down at the bottom end. Yes, it has done. And you can see the water is still running there, but it actually stops now because there's a gate that's appeared there. You know what? Let's go for these secrets. This secret here is a good example as well of how well Tomb Raider actually hides some of its more interesting moments. For example, this is a crack in the wall and it looks pretty decorative, so a lot of players would look at this and not really pay attention. But if you're smart and you went to Lara's manor, you will have learned that you can actually use those cracks to climb across the side here. Now, quite how Lara is walking on the water with no issues here. I mean, that's not realistic, but we're not going to hold that against Lara. It is a video game after all. And because now we have blocked the river off, we have lost the current, which very helpful. We can pick up the shotgun here. The range of weapons in Tomb Raider 1, it's not the best. You get the Uzis, you get the Magnum pistols, you get the shotgun here, and I think that's it. I'm pretty sure maybe there's one other weapon, but those are the weapons I generally tend to use. As I've said a few times, the combat in Tomb Raider 1 is not really the best, and while the variety of weapons does add some interesting spice to the proceedings, really it's the puzzles that are the defining aspect of this game. The puzzles and the areas that you're allowed to explore. I find the combat is really very much a step behind everything else in this game, and unfortunately I don't think future Tomb Raider games really address that too well. Combat remains a bit of a sore spot throughout the PlayStation 1 era of Tomb Raider games. I also find it interesting that they marked this room as a secret. I feel like a lot of players would have come down here, given that this was where the river that they were wandering through ends up. So I'm a bit surprised that this ends up being marked as a full on secret. We'll jump out here. Interestingly, the end to this level is actually hidden behind the waterfall that we were being pushed off of earlier on. Don't want to drop all the way down there because that looks quite painful, and I don't think Lara's going to survive that drop. As we drop down here, you'll see that the little sort of pond here remains, but the waterfall is now gone. Again, I'm not sure if too many people will have spotted the hole here initially. It is hidden quite well by the textures and everything else, but it is interesting because it does make it feel like you're entering a very hidden space. And that is the Lost Valley. I would say the Lost Valley is probably my favorite level of these initial four outings. I think it's probably got the most interesting ideas, and I do like how open the level gets once you head out into that valley area. So we're entering the final level of this initial section. A lot of the sections in Tomb Raider are split into fours. So the levels come in series of fours, and then you get a bit of story, and then you change location. We end up in Greece at one point, and we'll eventually end up in Atlantis, which shares some iconography with this location here. The boulder there is a very nice tip of the hat to Indiana Jones, and from this point, this level pretty much becomes a puzzle fest. We have to open the doors there, and in order to do that, we've got to do 3 different puzzles that are pretty distinct from each other. We also have to kill some more dinosaurs, so I feel like Lara here is, you know, committing to the bit and causing a second extinction event. The shotgun is super satisfying to use, and it's pretty powerful. We can go in any one of these 3 directions, but here's a good showcase for the issue that I mentioned earlier on. The save crystal there is a one-time use item, so make use of it here at the start, and it means you have to keep doing all 3 of the puzzles. But if you actually go and complete puzzles, you can actually save yourself some time if you end up dying. It's kind of interesting that they want you to make that kind of choice rather than just giving you multiple crystals, but I guess maybe they thought people would appreciate the choice there. In order to complete this puzzle, we have to move these pillars around this space. So we're going to head up top here. The interesting thing for me about the Tomb Raider series and where it's gone, and this is going to come off as a bit of a tangent compared to the rest of the video. I know it's quite tangenty already, but I feel like the newer Tomb Raider games, they don't really conform to this idea of Lara just exploring tombs, completing puzzles, and doing all this kind of thing. There's a lot more cinematic elements that were introduced into the Tomb Raider series in the Legends trilogy, and then really introduced in the reboot trilogy. Now, I don't mind the new Tomb Raider games. I don't particularly think they're great Tomb Raider games, but I do think they're great action adventure games, if you understand what I'm saying. So the decision to do Legacy of Atlantis, which is a straight up remake of Tomb Raider 1 for the second time, I think is a particularly interesting choice by Crystal Dynamics. And the reason I'm saying that is because they're going to have to repeat a lot of the things that they did with Anniversary, which is reimagining these spaces while also bringing them in line with the new gameplay style that, you know, they're trying to adapt to. One of the bigger issues that people had with Anniversary was that a lot of those new gameplay experiences watered down a lot of what made Tomb Raider 1 pretty iconic. And so a lot of people felt that Anniversary was an inferior version. And what worries me about Legacy of Atlantis is that it's probably going to do the same thing. A lot of the moments in the trailer that I reacted to over on that Nukem guy, I felt invoked a lot of moments from the early Tomb Raider 1 experience, which I was very happy to see. But at the same time, I don't know if we're going to be getting an experience that captures this sort of feeling of exploring tombs and just Lara on her own. I feel like they're going to add a lot of story elements in, and they're going to change a lot of what makes the Tomb Raider 1 experience really fun to try and squeeze it into that new framework. And as I said, I'm not trying to down on the new game, but I do have my concerns about the way Crystal Dynamics will handle it. And maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe when that game comes out and you're watching this in the future and you're saying, wow, you got this wrong, Nukem Guy. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that at the end of the day, that turns out to be a really, really great experience. But I kind of feel Anniversary showcased remaking Tomb Raider 1 while trying to change its core gameplay design and trying to make it fit a new mold. I just don't think it's a good idea. I wouldn't mind if they just took ideas from Tomb Raider 1 and put them into an overall new experience. But what I feel like we're going to see a lot of the same story beats, but expanded on, made bigger. And I don't quite know how that's going to work in the sort of new style of Tomb Raider. I feel like there are two very distinct flavors of Tomb Raider that exist. There's the classic games, which I think the remastered trilogy and the 4 to 6 releases really scratch the itch for. And then you get the new Tomb Raider games. Oh, wow, I have messed that up. Oh, wow. Well, that can happen when you're playing Tomb Raider. You can absolutely just throw yourself into the spikes like that. And, good for me. I feel like showing that off that was intentional, was it? It wasn't. Trust me, that was silly. But that's the thing with Tomb Raider. You've got to be really careful because the game will just punish you. Those spikes were put there for a reason because people failed to heed the warning of it all. These block puzzles, by the way, always amuse me because really there's no way of you knowing what you're actually pushing into here. The game really just wants you to push and hope. And I do feel that maybe this game should have done a slightly better job of making clear which walls are supposed to be pushable and which ones are not. Because there are some times in this game where you'll be wondering to yourself, is that pushable? Is it not pushable? Also, be careful of traps. Tomb Raider loves its traps, and as you can see there, that floor gave way. There's a bunch of spikes down there, and yeah, I'm pretty glad that I was able to avoid falling down. There are things in this game that I think haven't aged well. For example, like I said, the blocks, they're not really indicating that they can be pushed. There are some later in the game that are pretty hard to tell what you're actually meant to do with them. And sometimes it can be a bit frustrating when it feels like you basically have to push into nothing and hope for everything. Again, Tomb Raider's developers really love their traps, especially with the fact that there are wolves in this room. Like I said, the shotgun, really, really cool weapon. Takes out a lot of enemies like that in one hit, which I very, very much appreciate. Love the fact that Lara tried to grab that. That was kind of optimistic of me. I have to be completely honest with you there. That was very optimistic of me to hope that I could make that little jump like that. So I guess now we've far enough into the video where I can actually talk about the critical success of the game and how people responded to this one. Tomb Raider was viewed as quite revolutionary when it arrived on the scene. Lara Croft was viewed as a trendsetter and became one of the big characters for Sony and PlayStation in the 1990s. Tomb Raider 1 is generally viewed very positively by the gaming community, even though it doesn't appeal to everyone. I feel like the success of the game at the time showcases that this kind of game really had people excited and intrigued. And you can tell this because the sales numbers for Tomb Raider were pretty astronomical. The game sold over 7 million copies on PlayStation and PC and Sega Saturn, which is pretty incredible work, you have to say. It wouldn't be until the 2013 reboot of Tomb Raider that any game in the franchise would even come close to matching that, and that version actually did surpass it eventually. All of the games that came after Tomb Raider 1 would sell increasingly diminishing numbers, but they would still sell pretty insane, to be honest. The numbers that Tomb Raider was doing in the 1990s can't be understated. This was a franchise that was on fire, and I feel that at the core of that is this experience. Tomb Raider 1 is just such an excellent game. Its marriage of these quiet, empty spaces, Lara being as vulnerable as she is, and the fact that you get the music crescendos on PlayStation that I think are just so beautiful. Atmospheric music that really just adds so much volume and depth to these spaces. I genuinely can't say enough positive things about Tomb Raider 1. It is, without question, one of my favorite games of all time. And the simple fact is, I love coming back to experience it. And for a good long time, saying that you liked the PS1 Tomb Raider games would get you looks of derision from the wider gaming sphere. Unfortunately, these games became something of an acquired taste, and I feel that that was in part due to the poor preservation and also ability to carry these games forward. You couldn't play these games on Xboxes, for example, for the longest time. You could not play them on modern PlayStation consoles. They were made available on PlayStation Network eventually at the back end of the 2000s for PlayStation 3, but they didn't really offer anything in the way of enhancements. They were pretty much just straight ports. And for the longest time, that was the way that you experienced these games. You had to kind of put up with them, or you had to go into the community. Oh, wow, I forgot about the fact that the roof can actually kill you there. That's pretty dramatic, I have to say. Let's try that again without dying, shall we? But going back to talking about the Tomb Raider games, I feel that the remastered 1 to 3 and 4 to 6 collections did huge wonders for the reputation of these games. The fact that people went back to experience these games and fell in love with them all over again showcases that all these games needed was a slight uplift and the ability to bring them into the modern console experience. I have to say that if you want to play these games, you're better off going through that method. The 1 to 3 remaster and the 6 to 4 remaster, they're not perfect recreations of this PlayStation 1 experience, but I think that they are superior in pretty much every way that counts for a lot of people. I genuinely really love those games, and I have to say that when I go back to play Tomb Raider now, those are the way that I choose to do it. I know for some people that's probably faux pas, but hey, that I just like playing these classic Tomb Raider games. We're also about to see one of the cheesiest cutscenes in the entire series.
Well, you have my total attention now. I'm not quite sure if I've got yours, though. Hello?
I'll heel and hide you to a barn door yet.
Of course.
You and that driveling piece of the Scion. You want to keep it so bad, I'll harness it right up your...
Wait. We're talking about the artifact here?
Damn straight we are, right up.
Hold on. I'm sorry. This piece, you say. Where's the rest?
Miss Natla put Pierre DuPont on that trail.
And where is that?
Ha! You ain't fast enough for him.
So you think all this talking is just holding me up?
I don't know where his little jackrabbit frog legs are running him to. You'll have to ask Miss Natla.
Thank you. I will.
I love that so much. But yes, Tomb Raider 1 is one of my favourite games of all time, and the fact that it's now so easy to go back and experience this on modern consoles, pretty much on any platform that you want to play on, and the fact that it has been so well received, and people have looked back at this game and really understood that this was a trend-setting experience, makes me so, so happy. Tomb Raider 1 is a brilliant game in my opinion, and even just playing through it for this video, I've had a big smile on my face the entire time. It's just a joyous game for me. I genuinely cannot say enough nice things about Tomb Raider 1. And yeah, it does have its flaws. It's not for everyone, and it is cheesy as heck at points. For example, Lara here is about to pull one of the greatest slow-mo moves of all time. Like, how did she not just launch off the roof there? But I think I'm going to leave this here. I've had a really great time playing through this, and there is going to be plenty more Tomb Raider content on Newcomb's Backlog. One of the big reasons that I made this channel was so that I could talk about the Tomb Raider series in a more fitting environment, and I love most of the series. Even the new Tomb Raider games I get a good time out of, maybe for different reasons, but I do feel that all the Tomb Raider games, by and large, except one or two, which I'll be talking about on the channel, are really, really great. And For me, this will always be an iconic game. But let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts on Tomb Raider 1? Do you agree with me? Do you think this is a great game with a few flaws, but those can easily be overlooked? Or do you feel Tomb Raider 1 is overrated and it's just not that good an offering? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.